Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take these really dense stacks of sources, find the essential knowledge, and just give you that intellectual shortcut to being informed. Today, we are getting into a really complex and I'd say ambitious area of research.
Very ambitious.
It's a systematic attempt to use prophetic biblical timelines to approximate, well, the timing of the rapture. This is the event these sources believe concludes our current church age.
And kicks off the 7-year tribulation.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The documents we've gone through, they lay out this highly rigid chronological hypothesis. The absolute core of this whole thing rests on one belief.
Which is?
That human history, specifically human self-rule from Adam until the second coming, is given a hard stop, exactly 6,000 years.
And then after that?
It has to be immediately followed by the millennial kingdom. They see that as the seventh day, the 1,000-year Sabbath rest. So for you to get how they land on their conclusions, you really need to know the three foundational variables. They anchor every single calculation. If any of them shift, the whole model just falls apart. First, they fix the creation date. So Adam started at September 23, 3969 BC.
That's specific.
That's specific. Second, the start of the church age, which they tie to the crucifixion and Pentecost, is set at 32 AD. And third, those two dates mathematically force the start of the 7-year tribulation to land somewhere in the fall of 2026.
So if you've ever seen those predictions that keep popping up, the ones anchoring big events to the mid-2020s or 2033, this is what's behind all that.
This is the architecture.
We're giving you the foundational math so you can see the logic. It's all about tracing things back to 3969 BC to make sure the clock runs out at exactly 6,000 years when Jesus returns. Let's start with that cosmic calendar. How do they even justify a 6,000-year time limit?
The sources say that the entire structure for human time is modeled on the 7-day creation week from Genesis.
So not as history, but as a template.
Exactly, a prophetic template.
Yeah.
And that's where their governing axiom comes in. It's a core rule they pull from Scripture, often called the 1 year equals 1,000 years axiom.
I think I've heard of that from the Apostle Peter.
That's the one. It's their divine conversion rate. 1 day in Genesis equals 1,000 years of human time. So the 7-day template just maps directly onto 7,000 years of history.
Okay, but you said 6,000 years for human rule. Where does that number come from?
Right, so that's the crucial constraint. The sources bring in this idea of a prophetic limit of 120 jubilees.
And that jubilee is 50 years.
50 years. So you calculate 100 some jubilees times 50 years each, and you land right on 6,000 years. The insight here is that this theology places a hard, non-negotiable deadline on human self-governance, running from the first Adam to the last Adam.
Which means everything has to fit into that timeline ending in 2033.
It forces the endpoint.
That 120 Jubilee limit is fascinating. It just dictates the whole framework. And the researchers say this isn't just a modern idea, right?
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the corroboration they find in, ancient sources. They point out that the Essene calendar of Unas seems to align with this 120 Jubilee pattern. Yeah, in fact, the Essene calculations apparently suggested, totally independently, that the Messiah would be cut off, meaning the crucifixion in 32 AD.
Which is the exact same start date these modern models are using.
It aligns perfectly.
So using this 7-day, 7,000-year template, it maps out the major ages of history. So you get the first 2 days, or 2,000 years, from Adam to Abram.
Right.
Then another 2 days, another 2,000 years from Abraham up to Jesus. That gets us to 4,000 years. 4,000
years of history completed.
Which brings us to the final sprint. 2 days, 2,000 years, from Pentecost to the second coming. When Jesus returns, that's the 6,000-year mark. And the next 1,000 years is that seventh day, the Sabbath rest.
It's a very neat framework.
Yeah.
But it also means the starting gun for our current age, the church age, had to go off at exactly 4,000 years after Adam.
Okay, so if the cosmic calendar sets that boundary, let's get into the starting line for our current 2,000-year sprint. What do they mean precisely by the church age? I mean, beyond the simple Greek definition of ecclesia.
Right. For this research, the term is extremely precise. It refers strictly to the Church of Jesus or the body of Christ. The sources argue this specific global community of believers began at the Feast of Pentecost in 32 AD, the second Shavuot specifically.
So it's also called the Age of Pentecost.
Correct. And typologically so, in terms of patterns and symbols, this age matches up with the fourth feast of Jehovah, Shavuot, which is a key harvest feast.
A harvest feast.
Yes, and the sources really emphasize that this period is characterized by the door being open for this harvest of believers. They even point to the Hebrew letter delay.
The fourth letter.
The fourth letter, which means door. The argument is that this door stays open, allowing for a Pentecostal harvest until the rapture happens. That event fulfills the order of the resurrections, and symbolically, it shuts that door.
So that 32 AD date is it's absolutely critical.
It's monumental. The reason it's non-negotiable is that it locks in the 4,000-year mark. Remember, the creation date is 3969 BC.
Right.
Well, when you count forward to the 32 AD crucifixion and Pentecost, the time span is, according to these sources, precisely 4,000 years. That's the line in the sand. The final 2,000-year segment for the church age begins right there.
Now that we have the fixed start date, 32 AD, and the finish line at the end of 6,000 years in 2033, let's look at the math that narrows this down to the mid-2020s.
Okay.
Here's where it gets really interesting. But the calculations rely on a key concept. We need to define this idea of completed years.
Yes, this can be confusing. When they do this prophetic math, they treat time like a completed book. A year only counts fully once it is passed.
So if a period starts in year 32.
Right. A 2,000-year period that starts in year 32, the final year is 2032.
Yeah.
But to account for the full duration having been completed, they add 1 year. That's the completed year, and that's how they get to 2033 as the fixed return date.
That makes sense. It's a structural adjustment.
Precisely. So let's look at the two core methods they use. Both are aiming for that 2033 finish line. The first is the simplest, the crucifixion calculation.
Oh.
You take the start date, 32 AD, and you add the 2,000 years. That brings you to 2032 AD.
And then add the completed year.
Then you apply the rule, add 1 year, and the second coming lands precisely in 2033 AD. And since that happens at the end of the 7-year tribulation, you just subtract 7 years from the fall of 2033.
Which gives you the fall of 2026 as the start date.
The necessary start date.
That's remarkably clean. But what about the second calculation? I know some sources say the 4,000th year marker was a little bit earlier. How does that work?
That's the ministry start calculation. Some researchers argue that the prophetic 4,000th year actually happened in 28 AD, which they say was the start of Jesus' ministry. This just adds a fractional adjustment.
So the math is a little different.
A little. You take 28 AD, add the 3.5 years of ministry up to the crucifixion in 32 AD, and then add the 2,000 years. That gets you to 2031.5.
Okay.
If you then apply the completed years factor, the second coming is still right there, late 2032, early 2033. And when you subtract the 7-year tribulation, you still overwhelmingly converge on a 2026 start date.
So no matter how you slice it, the result is the same. Because that 6,000-year limit is non-negotiable, the church age has to end via the rapture sometime before or by the fall of 2026.
It's the deadline. It's the only way the 7-year tribulation can wrap up exactly in 2033.
It's genuinely fascinating how they bridge that gap between Genesis and modern history. Now, to sort of solidify this time frame, the research points to evidence from modern Israel, what they call the fig tree.
The fig tree, yes. This is where the Abraham factor comes in.
And what's that?
This parallel is one of the most cited pieces of evidence in these circles. The sources point out that Abraham was born in the year 1948 AM Anno Mundi from Adam.
And modern Israel was founded in
1948 AD. A perfect numerical parallel, 4 millennia apart.
Wow.
They push it further. Abraham entered the Promised Land in his 75th year, which was 2023 years from Adam. And in 2023 AD, modern Israel celebrated its 75th anniversary.
So the significance there is what, a pattern.
The argument is that it suggests history is shifting its focus away from the church and back to Israel. That the transition, the rapture, has to happen shortly after 2023, following Abraham's pattern.
And if we apply what they call the fig tree math, using those generational limits from Psalm 90, the 70 or 80 years, it still points to 2026.
It absolutely does. They propose 2 main scenarios. Scenario 1 uses the 70-year limit, but they argue the count shouldn't start in 1948, but in 1955.
Why 1955?
Or take 1948, the birth of Israel, and add 7 years. Prophetically, that represents the time Israel took to conquer Canaan. So 1955 plus 70 years is 2025. Add the completed year factor, you get 2026.
And what about the longer 80-year generation?
Scenario 2. It applies the 80-year limit, but argues the count starts in 1952, which is the source's suggested start of the Sabbath count for the land. So 1952 plus 80 years gets you to 2032.
Which is the year just before the 2033 return.
Exactly. So subtract the 7-year tribulation, and the tribulation has to start in 2025. Or again, 2026 with the completed year rule.
So the analysis is that all these different timelines, the cosmic clock, the crucifixion date, the fig tree math, they all triangulate.
They all narrow down to the fall of 2026 as the required starting point.
Okay, so we have the dates. Let's shift to the near future. So what does this all mean? Beyond just the dates, what has to actually be in place in the world for these predictions to unfold?
That's the question that moves us from calculation to current events. The start of the 7-year tribulation, which the sources call Daniel's 70th week, needs two things to happen very quickly.
What are they?
First, a 7-year peace covenant involving Israel, and second, the start of daily animal sacrifices in Jerusalem.
And the sacrifices are the big one,
That is the primary prerequisite. It requires a third temple in Jerusalem, and that's the biggest hurdle, given the sensitivity of the Temple Mount.
which is where the Dome of the Rock is. And the sources have a very specific theory about how that could change, right? Without starting a global war.
They do. It's called the Abraham Houses of Worship theory. It suggests that instead of demolition, the Temple Mount will be reconfigured into a kind of unified interfaith complex.
Like the one in Abu Dhabi.
A symbolic replication of that, yes. The idea is that this would be applied to the Temple Mount to secure a northern section for the new temple. The configuration would have three distinct centers, they list them out. A new white building linked to the stars for the third temple, representing what they call apostate Judaism. Then the golden dome linked to the sun stays for the Dome of the Rock, representing apostate Islam. And finally, the gray Al-Aqsa, the old Crusader church, linked to the moon for apostate Christianity.
So it's a political solution that appears harmonious, but
But prophetically, they say it's characterized by apostasy. It sets the final stage.
that level of detail shows the kind of geopolitical alignment they think is required. It's not just math.
Not at all. And before we wrap up, the research ends with a fascinating cultural note.
Yeah.
It suggests that what we're seeing in the mainstream news might actually be laying the groundwork.
Yes.
They point to the huge increase in major headlines and government reports about UFOs, UAPs, this idea of an alien invasion or even an alien rapture event.
Right, that's been everywhere.
The researcher wonders if this is a kind of soft disclosure, a narrative preparation to provide a plausible, secular explanation for millions of people suddenly disappearing when the rapture occurs. It's a way for the world to quickly rationalize it.
This deep dive has laid out a truly rigorous, highly specific framework. So to summarize the core hypothesis for you one last time, based on that hard limit of the 6,000-year creation timeline, the 120 Jubilees, and the firm 32 AD start date for the church age, multiple independent calculations all seem to converge on a timeline where the final 7-year period, Daniel's 70th week, likely begins in the fall of 2026 and ends exactly 6,000 years later in the 2033 AD.
And that framework, understanding how these predictions are derived, is the entire point of this deep dive. You now understand the complex math, the typologies, and the geopolitical requirements that are driving this whole area of prophecy research. The sources really emphasize that the 6,000-year human rulership must end on the exact day Jesus returns. But if the calculations are this precise, pinpointing a start date based on things like Abraham's 75th anniversary in 2023 or that 1955 fig tree calculation, and the church age itself corresponds to the Feast of Pentecost, the summer wheat harvest. It does raise an important question.
Which is?
Does the convergence of these specific dates imply the rapture must adhere not just to a specific year, but to the typology of a specific time of year? Tying the end of the age directly to that summer harvest season, you are left to consider the sheer complexity of linking all these ancient prophetic and modern dates to a single point on the calendar.